Hello, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are joining us from. And thank you so much for joining our program today at Gulf International Forum. This is a timely panel discussion with three distinguished experts on U.S. Gulf relations, U.S.-Saudi relations. Today, we will discuss the visit of His Royal Highness Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to Washington, D.C. We'll try to discuss the historical evolution of U.S. And the future trajectory as well of the U.S.-Saudi relations and U.S. GCC relations, examining how a partnership long defined by security guarantees and energy interdependence is being examined under President Trump's leadership. From its origin in the Cold War strategic cooperation to its contemporary challenges, the US-Saudi relationship has wavered between moments of deep alignment and periods of political strain. Anchored in Crown Prince's visit to Washington, D.C., the discussion, we hope to assess in today's discussion whether the current moment represents a renewed consolidation of ties or a broader recalibration driven by shifting regional realities. Whether the Saudi Arabia's expanding strategic autonomy or the evolving American priorities in the Middle East. Our distinguished speakers will also evaluate how U.S. policy toward Iran, Saudi Arabia's regional policies in Gaza, Syria, and across the region as well, and the prospects for normalization with Israel are reshaping the bilateral equation. The conversation will also consider whether this phase heralds a durable strategic realignment or a transitional adjustment in a relationship searching for a renewed purpose and balance. Bios of our panelists are on the website, the event announcement on the website, but let me introduce briefly. Our first speaker is Dr. Aziz Alghashian. He's a senior geopolitics senior research fellow and director of research with ORF Middle East in Dubai. He's also a senior non-resident fellow with us here at the forum. He's a researcher from Saudi Arabia who focuses on the kingdom's foreign policy strategies. Second speaker is Dr. Kristian Ulrichsen, Kristian quotes Ulrichsen. He's also a senior non-resident fellow with us, and he's a Baker Institute fellow for the Middle East. His research examines the changing position of Gulf states in a global order and the emergence of long-term non-military challenges to regional security. The third speaker is Ms. Anna Jacobs, is the Gulf Regional Advisor at the European Institute of Peace. She's a non-resident fellow at the Arab Gulf State Institute in Washington. Her research focuses on the role of the Arab Gulf states play in conflict and mediation, as well as Gulf regional security and dialogue. If I may start with you, Dr. Aziz, a general overview of the U.S.-Saudi relations under President Trump. How would you characterize the trajectory of this relation and President Trump under President Trump leadership, and what key factors have allowed the partnership to improve?
Well, firstly, Anas, thank you very much for having me, and thank you to the Gulf International Forum. It's a real pleasure to join Anna and Kristian as well. So I think there's a few things that really stood out for me. I do anticipate that the relationship will be on the ascent, that it will improve, or not even improve, but I would say it will increase and be more smoother. And the reason being is because I think personally the fact that this is now a second opportunity based on the first Trump MBS relationship in the first Trump administration, I think now there is something key, which is the fact that both states, the United States and Saudi Arabia, probably understand not only the nature of the interests that they want from each other, but I think the limitations of each other's relations, or the limitations of or what not to expect, in my opinion. And I think, in my opinion, this is a strength. In the first Trump administration, I think there was disappointment from, especially towards the second half of the Trump administration, there was disappointment, I would say, from Saudi Arabia. I think anybody that follows Saudi and the GCC will, find that 2019 and Al-Baghaig and Al-Kharis strikes on Saudi oil refineries, on Aramco oil refineries, was a critical juncture in not just the Saudi-American relationship. I don't think it was that much of a juncture for the Saudi-American relationship, but it was a pivotal moment, in my opinion, for the current Saudi leadership, which was very new at that point. And in my opinion, there was this expectation that the United States and Donald Trump is someone who will be there for us, no matter what, or as much as I can, or as much as they can be there. Now, in my opinion, I think now they understand the relations, and they understand that, listen, the notion of alliances and the fact that they are not going to bend over backwards for anybody is something that I think gives them more confidence moving forward. 1 second, please. Sorry about that. 1 second, please. So I think when it comes to this meeting, there's two things that I would say. There is an American first approach that kind of overlaps with a Saudi first approach. And that nexus is very fascinating because I think they're both, they speak the same language, they speak the same interests, but also, as I said previously, they're also understanding the limitations of each other and what they could provide for each other. This, in my opinion, and I'll just conclude with this, in my opinion, I think makes me call that, I'll call it and I'll say, I think the relationship will improve. I think they're both very confident. I think the Saudi leadership is becoming more and more confident of dealing and balancing superpower relations. And therefore, I think it's going to be a wait and see approach to how far this develops. The last point that I would say is I think there needs to be I think more focus on the following up mechanisms, and that's not something that I have followed in particular. I think, in my opinion, there's been a lot of deals that have been made, the F-35s, for example, and I think it will be interesting to see how this is followed up, how they will assess the situation. What are the technicalities that is needed? What is also the obstacles and the fact that maybe and the military impairment that they would get with Israel, for example? Is there going to be the same kind of, are they going to be on par? Are they going to even buy it? So I think it will be the following up mechanisms is something that to keep an eye on.
Thank you, Dr. Aziz. Dr. Ulrichsen, the Economic and Defense Partnership during Crown Prince's visit to Washington, did the discussion signal a realignment of the US-Saudi relations toward economically driven partnership, or do they confirm a hybrid model in which economic cooperation and defense commitments are jointly reinforcing this bilateral relations? Your thoughts?
Well, thank you first for having me. It was a very timely visit last week. It was extremely different in tone from the first visit Mohammed Salman paid to the White House in 2018. I had to keep two visits on that occasion, one in 17, the second in 18. The tone was very different. The welcome was extremely different. I think what we have seen is a shift over some time, as Aziz has said. The kind of oil for security backdrop to US-Saudi relations was never the only relationship to watch, but over time it has been overtaken by other developments, including Saudi concerns about the reliability of US security guarantees after 2019, probably before that as well. Obviously, the US is now a major oil and gas player in its own right, doesn't import Saudi oil, but we have seen economic partnerships becoming more important over years. We have seen this year especially, I think from a Saudi point of view, trying to build on the momentum of President Trump's election. We saw MBS becoming one of the first leaders to speak with Trump in January, pledge $500 billion of investments. Obviously, the visit of Trump in May to Riyadh. There were investment summits. There was a big Future Investment Initiative summit in Miami in February that President Trump attended. Then there was the American Business Forum in October, which had a heavy Saudi presence. So in a sense, the economic partnership is trying to develop and build on a sense of momentum in that relationship. There's a risk, I think, that there's a personalization of an institutional relationship, given the proximity of members of the Trump family and in a circle with the Saudi leadership. Trump will not be here forever. We are seeing some signs of him becoming the inevitable sort of second-term lame duck period. So I think it's important to sort of balance the close personal networks and ties with the deeper institutional basis of that relationship. We obviously saw huge pledges of up to $1 trillion of investment into the US. I completely agree with Aziz that there's an America first and a Saudi first approach, which are quite similar in so many ways, but will they begin to clash? And we've seen certainly a lot of the public investment funds initiatives, the future investment initiatives, trying to actually get investment into Saudi Arabia rather than just promising Saudi investment into US companies or companies around the world. I think that will be something to watch, the balancing act between getting investment into Saudi Arabia, but also Saudis investing in the US economy. I mean, for context, $1 trillion is an approximate valuation of the PIF as it stands. And we have to see over what time period this is going to be implemented and to what degree of just MOUs and agreements to talk about agreements then followed by actual sort of deals. Now, we've obviously seen a big shift into AI with Humane, established in May when Trump actually first visited Riyadh. It's become a huge player very quickly. So I think we're seeing a retooling of some of the Vision 2030 initiatives as Vision 2030 enters its final phase. There's maybe a focus away from some of the giga projects like the line, moving towards AI. And clearly there's a big US interest there, not just in the technology, but ensuring that Saudi goes with US technology. I think that was a big feature of the visit. For me, I think the significance of the visit and some of the deals that were announced was the delinking of the F-35 offer from normalization. That was a big shift in the US position. If you think about the UAE being offered the F-35 as part of the package for signing the Abraham Accords, that has now been delinked in a way. We obviously saw with the F-35 offer to the UAE how that then got entangled in geopolitical issues and concerns, and ultimately was never delivered. We never had any follow through on that. In fact, the deal collapsed. So I think that will be something to watch, because the Saudis do want additional security guarantees and defense agreements, especially after the summer where we saw first Iran attack a GCC state in June, and obviously the Israelis do the same in September. So we've seen repeated red lines being crossed. So I think in terms of the question you asked about kind of prioritizing economic partnership, absolutely. But linking economic prosperity, I think, with regional stability, as was made the case in May when Trump went to the Gulf, there was a sense that he could see for himself what a regionally stable Gulf could offer. But of course, then we had the 12-day war just a few weeks later and the summer of strikes. So I think trying to build on that momentum and to show that a prosperous Gulf can play into the Trump agenda with America first, with investment, that will be something to follow through in the weeks and months ahead.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ulrichsen. We have Ambassador Theros back. He fixed his internet issue. So welcome back, Ambassador Theros.
Thank you very much. It's terribly embarrassing, but not much we could do about it, I'm afraid.
No problem. So let me ask Anna the question, and then I'll leave the studio, and Ambassador Theros will be in charge. Anna, again, thank you so much for joining us. about MBS visit and the Gulf mediation role in the context of Mohammed bin Salman's visit to Washington. What signals did his meeting with President Trump send regarding U.S. support for Saudi Arabia's expanding role as regional mediator? Does this visit suggest deeper U.S.-Saudi coordination on the escalation efforts, whether in Gaza or Ukraine? And are these mediation initiatives likely to remain largely Saudi-led? Your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. This is absolutely a very timely discussion. I first want to push back a little bit on the question in the sense, I mean, in terms of Gaza and Ukraine, these, I would not call either of them particularly Saudi-led initiatives. I think Saudi Arabia has played an important role in various ways, I think particularly on the diplomatic front by hosting meetings. But I think both of those at the moment, I think, are more U.S.-led efforts in partnership with other regional partners. I think, first of all, it was very clear that conflict mediation really wasn't a top priority during this visit. If anything, I think many of us were expecting to hear more about Gaza, about Trump's 20-point plan and the UN Security Council resolution that was passed last week, or other issues such as Syria. But actually, the conflict that came up was Sudan more than anything, which again is very crucial and very timely. But I think many people were surprised that out of all of the conflicts, that this is the one that the Crown Prince allegedly brought up, and which, of course, President Trump announced publicly. So I think this is very necessary and important. And Saudi Arabia has obviously played a major role in mediating and managing that conflict as well. So I think that's really where the conflict mediation came up the most. I think likely there were some conversations about Iran as well. I think Russia and Ukraine was probably less of a topic in terms of the U.S.-Saudi relationship right now. Talks on that conflict or have been happening in Geneva and seem much more, I think, U.S.-led right now. Again, Saudi Arabia played a crucial role in the past. I mean, earlier this year by hosting direct talks between the U.S. and Russia. And I think Saudi Arabia continues to offer to host either U.S.-Russia talks or maybe indirect Russia-Ukraine talks. But I think at this point, Saudi Arabia's value added on that front it is a little bit unclear, while there are still pretty strong communication lines between the U.S. and Russia, and particularly between President Trump and President Putin. So I think on that conflict as well, Saudi Arabia, I think, is ready to play a role and to be helpful, and they have been helpful in the past. But I think that their role right now isn't a crucial one. I think on Gaza, again, I think many of us were expecting this to come up a bit more. It seemed to come up more in the conversation about potential Saudi-Israel normalization, which of course is not happening right now. The Crown Prince made it very clear that that would only happen if there was a political process in place for a two-state solution. And again, when it comes to sort of Saudi Arabia's role in mediating around Gaza, their role hasn't really been one of a mediator per se. That role has obviously been played more by Qatar and by Egypt, but Saudi Arabia has played a very essential role in terms of, global diplomacy, in terms of advocating for a two-state solution. I think, in terms of hosting various multilateral meetings on Gaza, on ending the war, and sort of facilitating dialogue on questions of governance, reconstruction, and other, I think, thorny issues. So I think Saudi Arabia's role has been critical on Gaza as well. I know, for example, in terms of the UN Security Council resolution that was passed last week on Trump's so-called peace plan, Saudi Arabia and other regional actors played a very critical role in making sure that there was language in the document about a political horizon for Palestinian statehood. This is something that had been left out of it. So I think this is where Saudi Arabia has played a very critical role. It's really in making sure that the two-state solution framework is kept on the table, and that it remains relevant, and that the U.S. administration does not try to remove it from these discussions. So that's where I think Saudi Arabia really has played a critical role. And again, I think that the U.S. is very supportive of this role. I think that the U.S. appreciates Saudi Arabia's leading role in the region, and especially on the issue of Gaza. But it really wasn't, I think, a high priority issue during the visit last week. So thank you.
Anna, thank you very much. Again, my apologies to all concerned. I will. I can't quite sue the internet provider, but I was thinking of it as trying to get through to them. Since I missed 2/3 of this, I would like to start this off with questions, and I have a question of my own. If it was addressed earlier, my apologies. But I was struck both in the reporting on the Mohammed bin Salman visit and on other reporting in the region, that no one seems to have paid a great deal of attention to the Saudi-Pakistani agreement. It's an agreement that it was described in the press as a formal agreement calling upon mutual defense, and Pakistan can actually provide a great deal of defense if it is directed at Israel. Do you think that this agreement was very much the Saudis ginning up a defensive posture against the Israelis, keeping in mind that Pakistan is a nuclear power? Pakistan is the only country in the world that reasonably could be expected to use nuclear weapons against Israel if Israel got out of hand. To any of the panelists, I'd appreciate a commentary on that.
Yeah, I don't mind having a go at that. So I think when it comes to the Saudi-Pakistan deal, the Saudi-Pakistan Defense Pact, in my opinion, I think the timing was interesting, because also the timing not only came after the Israeli strike on Doha, but it came out after the Arab and Islamic summit that was held in Doha, which was very, which quite frankly was quite embarrassing. Many people would say the resolutions, and a lot of the times people would say, a lot of statements said there's no time for words, now it's time for actions, and that's all we heard. We just heard lots of words and no actions. And I think, in my opinion, this spoke to a lot of insecurity within the Gulf, that the fact that, goodness gracious, we seem to be very susceptible. And therefore, in my opinion, the Saudi-Pakistan deal was also not just a way of trying to deter Israel. But I think it was also a signal to the domestic sides, to the domestic side, and to the domestic contingency, and basically say that, listen, we have some sort of layer of defense that is there, and maybe it's worth even trying to explore it even more. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but there was a meeting. I'm sorry, there was an agreement, but the details of such is still not really ironed out. And just to your point, I think, Ambassador, I think the Saudi defense minister is in Islamabad today. So I think, in my opinion, this is very interesting. It was mostly, for me, it was a sign of saying, listen, there are options, and not Saudi Arabia and GCC states, but I think Saudi Arabia and Pakistan basically have options. So for me, this is also very interesting, because the threat perception, and I think we've spoken about this even before, the threat perception has changed, and inside Saudi Arabia, it has changed. And I think even in DC, and you guys could correct me if I'm wrong, but I think more and more people are realizing that perhaps Israel, with under Netanyahu, is shooting itself in the foot. Right now, the discussions of normalization is incredibly toxic. And I think, to what both Kristian and Anna said earlier, the whole idea of normalization is just not really even worth talking about. And that's one of the reasons why I think, even when it comes to the domestic aspect inside Saudi Arabia, there was a celebration, in my opinion, about this, because I think there was a circumnavigation and cutting away of the F-35s from normalization with Israel. So the Saudi-Pakistan deal is important because it also sheds light on that dynamic. But there's another thing that I wanted to say, which is how I think Saudi views the United States. And I think it views the United States, and I've written about this recently, I think it, notwithstanding the doubt, the universal doubt that many people have in the reliability of an American security umbrella, the Saudi Arabians, or the Saudis, have still chosen the United States as an ally to elevate its relationship to an alliance. It may be symbolic, but I think, in my opinion, there's also political signals to this, because one thing that also struck out, and if I could go back to the MBS meeting in the Oval Office, one thing for me that really struck out was the fact that how MBS was trying to strike a bipartisan issue, or trying to strike a bipartisan kind of rhetoric and angle. It was interesting, because I think they knew that Trump is just so polarizing that the Saudis kind of weren't careful enough of being spun by the kind of DC politics. And when Donald Trump left and President Biden was ushered in, Saudi Arabia was a Trump legacy. And therefore, they were politicized too much as a Trump legacy. This time, I think it's different. I think he was really trying to strike this kind of bipartisan issue. He was, he said it very interesting things of saying, listen, we're investing, not really to please Donald Trump or to please the United States. We're investing for us. And we're trying to be, we're investing also in the United States. He said things like, for example, President Roosevelt was a Democrat, Reagan was a Republican, and of course you, Donald Trump, you're the man. But for me, it's interesting to see that. And why? Because I think Saudis still have made the decision that they will still work with the United States, and it's still their main preference to develop their security relationship. I think something's very interesting that it's transitioning now. Saudis is not, the Saudis and maybe others are trying to decrease their dependency on the United States and trying to customize their own kind of defense and deterrence capabilities. But even in that process of developing that deterrence capabilities, the United States is the first kind of first option. And even right now, being an ally and an official ally of the United States may have just add that extra layer of political costs in regarding deterrence. And the second thing also, I think developing the nuclear capabilities and the nuclear cooperation, and how Saudi is actually willing to be pragmatic here, and they're trying to get something and consolidate and then maybe negotiate something in the future. I think, they're trying to, it's clear they still want to, their preferences with the United States, but there's an element of security with this, that there's political costs. And the last thing that I would say is that I think they know that there will be unreliability in this kind of field. I know that sometimes if Saudi Arabia will get struck, or there is some kind of security turbulence of some sort, the whims, the DC. What this does. Hello.
Hello.
Yeah. And good. It's my turn to sue the internet provider now. I think what it does is also, whenever the United States may illustrate unreliability, it could be an opportunity to get something more from the United States later on, as Qatar did, and bless and legitimize Saudi's diversification of strategic relations with other superpowers. So, for example, the F-35 that I think Kristian was talking about, there's structural obstacles within the United States of delivering them. There is a lot of delays. And so this, in my opinion, I think the Saudis are very, aware of this situation. And so the longer they delay, the more they could diversify relations, or they may instrumentalize this delay to get something even better in the United States. So I think the Saudis have positioned themselves to be in a place where they have options, and it's a result of a lot of, I think, preemptive and proactive diplomacy by the Saudis.
That's a really good explanation. I find it very persuasive. Related to what you said, and particularly your last point, I came away from reading about the meeting with the impression that this was actually almost an exploratory trip by Mohammed bin Salman. He was coming to the USA. I've just moved from murderous pariah to an important, to a rather important ally, and somebody who could push the Americans around a little bit. And it appears that he came looking for what will Trump give him. And he sort of looked in a transactional way. I'm going to put $1 trillion here, and I might do that. And here, what's in it for me? And he avoided discussions where Trump would have had difficulty giving him something. Trump would have had a lot of problems if Mohammed bin Salman had asked, well, do you really mean normalization will lead to a Palestinian state, or have you bought into my? He didn't want to ask him hard questions. He wanted to, as I say, it was a reconnaissance mission. I'm out there, a reconnaissance by fire. I'm out there. I'm going to give you something. What are you giving me right now? What are you giving me out of the low-hanging fruit that's out there? And an F-35 apparently, in Mohammed bin Salman's mind, was a low-hanging fruit, and in some way or other, he seems to have gotten it. And he also basically asked him for things. How do I rank next to the Israelis? I think it was also feeling Trump out to, is he really turning on the Israelis? Is he the first American president since 1956 to do something or to threaten something really bad for the Israelis? And anyway, your thoughts on that? I noticed a couple of smiles and a grin at the moment when I was looking at you all. Anna?
Yeah, I would like to hop in on that. I mean, so I think in some ways that's very true, for sure. But I also think that this visit did lead to some real concrete agreements. So for me, I mean, the big one, I think it's clear that things still have to be worked out, that the process for implementing a lot of this is very slow. But I think there were some very clear wins. I mean, one of which is the MOU on AI cooperation, and the fact that, I mean, the U.S. approved the export of these very sensitive AI chips to Humane in Saudi Arabia, but also G42 in the UAE. I think that was a major one. I think that was a long time coming, at least under this administration, but nonetheless, it was announced as well. I think the strategic framework on critical minerals cooperation was also critical, even though it has received a little less attention. I mean, there is a very, very, very critical joint investment project that was announced with the U.S. in rare earth minerals with the Pentagon, and this would be in Saudi Arabia itself. The Pentagon, is partnering with MP Materials and Ma'aden, basically to develop a rare earth refinery in Saudi Arabia. This is huge, and the ultimate aim of this is to diversify the supply chain of critical minerals, which is currently dominated by China. So I think that also, I think there were a lot of signals on this visit that the U.S., the public and private sector, is currently and will be for a long time the top partner for Saudi companies, for Saudi projects, and many other things. So I think that while Saudi Arabia, of course, has very strong ties with Russia, with China, I think that the message that I really heard from last week is that the U.S. remains their most important bilateral relationship right now, and it's not just on the security front; it's economically, and especially in the very critical technology sector now. So for me, this was really a key message. Thanks.
Ulrich, any ideas? Any thoughts?
Well, I think the messaging out of the visit was very much the Saudis trying to impress on the administration that there are two visions of regional order. There is a vision of regional order, which is based on trade, investment, as they would see it, wealth and prosperity for both sides, which was very much the message the Gulf states were putting on for Trump when he went to Riyadh, Doha, and Abu Dhabi in May. And there's an alternative vision of regional order based on conflict and confrontation, which, as the Saudis would see it, is Iran, increasingly Netanyahu's Israel, and we've seen a big shift in the ways the Saudis talk about Israel as a spoiler, as a potential destabilizer, using language in the past that they would have used about Iran.
Yep.
I think from the Gulf point of view and from the Saudis' point of view, they're very much emphasizing de-risking because they need to focus on domestic developments. 2030 is getting closer, it's 4 years away. To retool, as Anna was saying, with critical minerals, with AI, to insert themselves into US, kind of very much US interests in these areas. And so they can't afford the region to become plunged into another round of conflict. And I think from the regional perspective, there was a sense of optimism in May, post the visit to the Gulf, which was overtaken by events in June and, of course, in September. So I think the opportunity of this visit now is to really try to imprint on Trump's mind that all these things are possible, but they will not be possible if the region is once again in the middle of a firing zone. So I think that was another maybe unstated message, but there will certainly be hoping in the Gulf that we're not followed by another round of conflict as was the case in May, June, because they need to make sure that we don't see another round of fighting between Israel and Iran, because I think there's a concern in all regional capitals that the bar has been steadily rising in confrontation. Red lines have been not just crossed, but shattered, and the next red line could be greater still. So I think that was another key message out of the meeting last week.
That's interesting. I have a question from the audience, most of which has been answered, rather a lengthy question, most of which has been answered. But one part of it is Trump's policies empower or limit Saudi Arabia's ability to shape the outcomes in Gaza. This is more a question about Trump, I suppose, than Saudi Arabia, except his question would imply that Trump is still calling the shots on this one, and I'm of the opinion that he may be missing on some of those shots in the relationship with Saudi Arabia. I tend to believe that the Saudis are going to let Trump worry about this for a little bit and see how much progress they make on his peace plan. Any thoughts there?
Yeah. Can I
Sure.
hop in on that? I think the UN Security Council resolution that was passed very, very quickly last week has a multitude of problems and unanswered questions, to put it politely. And I think Saudi Arabia is very well aware of this. I think most actors in the region are. But I think that they supported it with a lot of hesitancy, because it's the only conversation happening right now on this, sadly. I think, too, because they feel that it involves the U.S., which is something that will be ultimately helpful but necessary as well to make anything work. I think, too, perhaps the point of view in Riyadh is that they need to keep Trump active and involved on this. And they feel that their value added and their role is really making sure that any settlement includes a framework for a two-state solution and a political process. I really think this is what Saudi Arabia is trying to emphasize. So I think that they see their role in terms of advocating for that every step of the way. And I think the other part of this other question of sort of Saudi Arabia's role in the immediate kind of implementation of the ceasefire, I think Saudi Arabia is playing less of a role there. I think other regional actors will be more critical in terms of the ISF, in terms of even in terms, I think, of the financial role and sort of longer term reconstruction. However, I do think that Saudi Arabia will, of course, always remain involved. I think it uses its very close relationship with the U.S. to be helpful on this. And I think that, again, Saudi Arabia very much sees itself as sort of a leading role, a leading power in the region. It sort of acts as a regional coordinator and convenes everyone to, I think, make sure that people or that leaders and positions are more aligned to, again, to more effectively advocate a clear position. So I do think that this is their role, and they see it more, again, in terms of pushing for a two-state solution in any sort of framework. But on the ceasefire side, on implementing it, I think that they are playing a slightly less significant role than some of the other actors, like Qatar and Egypt, Turkey as well, maybe. But nonetheless, I do think that Saudi Arabia will remain, a critical player in any negotiations moving forward. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Going to another topic, and again, with my apologies if it was discussed in the early part of the session. Iran is in an interesting position. It clearly has suffered a defeat both militarily and politically. It has, as noted in my opening statement, some severe internal problems as well, between the drought and the fact that it has a geriatric leadership and no clear succession to what is rapidly becoming a less than competent leader as the supreme leader. The Gulf states all seem interested in drawing Iran in the sense that better the relationship, the less likely that Iran will become a target again for the Americans. It's always going to be a target for the Israelis, but the Americans have indicated that they're in charge right now. So it'll be less of a target for the Americans, and the Iranians seem to be running hot and cold as to what they would like the relationship with the Gulf to be. Any thoughts on that sort of general topic?
Well, I can go. I think first of all, the 2023 rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran that was announced in China showed two things. The immediate significance was that the focus in DC, the sort of Beltway kind of focus, almost obsessive fixation on normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel, really had, as Aziz I think said earlier, had no basis in kind of a real understanding of regional dynamics, and especially of Saudi sort of positioning and views given as post-2019 sort of circumstances. And the fact that the Saudis did normalize, they just didn't normalize with Israel, they normalized with Iran, and it was announced by and in China, I think spoke volumes as to the shifts in some of the centers of gravity that are pulling the Gulf states in sort of different directions. I think the other point of significance is that the rapprochement has shown its resilience. It has survived the stress tests of Gaza, so stress test the 12-day war. I mean, the relationship may not be warm, it's functional, it probably prevented a much deeper set of regional confrontations linked to the kind of aftershocks and regionalization of the conflict post-2023. So I think it's there to stay. I think the Saudis now, if they're following conditions in Yemen with the Houthis becoming more aggressive, once again beginning to threaten Saudi Arabia, especially now that the attacks on the Red Sea shipping seem to be winding down, I think there will be a focus on trying to ensure that there isn't another round of Houthi kind of aggression and targeting of Saudi cities and infrastructure. And I think that will be again another point maybe where the Saudis are talking to the Americans, to the Iranians and others, albeit of course that the Houthis are first and foremost a Yemeni group that acts in their interest, doesn't necessarily take orders from Iran. So I think that will be something that the Saudis are focusing on extremely closely in the weeks ahead, because that might be the next flashpoint that they need to think about. Of course, in Iran's case, they do not want to be caught in the middle of another conflict between the Israelis and the Iranians, just because there might be a temptation in Israel that all it takes is one more push that Israel did so much damage last time. We eliminated so many of the sort of mid and fairly senior political and military figures that all it takes is one more shove to sort of send a regime crashing down. And I think that temptation if it is realized, I think would lead to very severe circumstances. And I think that's what the Saudis will be probably talking much more to the Americans on, to make sure that the administration understands the risks of any such approach and doesn't just agree to any action after the fact, as they appear to do back in June.
Thank you. Good. Anyone else on?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. So I think when it comes to this issue, in my opinion, I mean, I agree very much that the prospects of Saudi-Iranian relations and the whole, not only that, I mean, the whole logic of Saudi-Israeli normalization, that's just very much predicated on, nope, wrong guy. Yeah, wrong guy. There you go. There you go. So that Saudi-Iranian Saudi-Israeli relations or normalization will be predicated on or attached to some sort of mutuality on Iran is just false. And I say this time and again, and I always tell people and just say, listen, just please, as much as you can, just move away from this logic, this whole logic of the enemy of my enemy is my friend, this whole notion of trying to say that, well, the Saudis and Israelis are just going to move and develop relations to counter Iran is just not, it's been proved false time and again. As Kristian said, that the normalization happened with Iran. Now, why do I think it will continue? And in my opinion, I think, the Saudi-Iranian rapprochement will continue because I think we've seen in the summer and how they responded. Iran suggests that, okay, while the rapprochement is working, there's still also limitations to this, that Iran still poses a great deal a threat. And I think the reason why I think the Saudi-Iranian rapprochement will continue is because this rapprochement at the very foundation is based on security, not really, out of just love and dove and everything else. It's based on trying to mitigate this conflict, put it in a cap, and rather than trying to work on changing this relationship from one of existential threat to one of regional disagreement between neighbors, amongst other things. And I think the cooperation when it comes to, for example, another reason why Saudi-Israeli normalization will be even more distant is because right now there is rhetoric that coming out of Israel, basically, that, listen, the Abraham Accords, Saudi-Israeli normalization, security architecture that we keep hearing time and again about is designed to isolate Iran. And that's the last, I don't think that's what really Saudis or any other Gulf states want, because they know that this is something they could be targeted by. Another thing that, when we see, about the security perception or threat perception, yes, the Israeli Air Force illustrated that this is now a security threat, but also the fact that the Iranian missile program infiltrated a very multi-layered, sophisticated, small space in Israel suggests that, goodness, these missiles, man, what's to stop that coming from anywhere if it wanted to go anywhere in the Gulf? So rapprochement is going to continue. And the fact that there is even an increase of temperature between Israel and the Iranians, it will continue, suggests that, rapprochement is the way forward. So I think, in my opinion, to what extent will it spill over for the Saudis and just finally say, spill over as in, for the Iranians, for them to say, listen, we're going to behave in a way to communicate to the Saudis and others and say, wow, okay, Iran has really changed fundamentally. Right now, it's in management mode. I think the management mode is working very well, but the real challenge is really, taking it to the next step of fundamentally changing the conflict. And unfortunately, Israel, and to be honest with you, probably whims in the United States, and rhetoric from the United States is a complicator of that. And this is where, personally, I see a great deal of divergence between Saudi Arabia and Israel, and between Saudi Arabia and the United States when it comes to this file. And that's why, one of the things that we saw even in the meetings is that, how Donald Trump was saying, we did this to Iran and we did that to Iran. And I'll be very honest with you, I don't think, the Saudis are very comfortable with that. But again, it's part of this whole management that they're trying to do. And we're seeing now really the benefit of Saudi Iranian open communication. It's easier to communicate these things a lot more.
Can I hop in as well?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I just think that's absolutely right, and I do think that the Saudi-Iran relationship will continue. And just to echo what everyone else has said, there's still significant mistrust, absolutely. But I think from the Saudi point of view, it is about conflict management. It is about containment. It is not about resolving every problem they have with Iran. It is about conflict mitigation and management. I also think it will continue, and that Saudi Arabia will keep open the dialogue channels, because I think there's also a concern about Iran being backed into a corner and how this could lead them to act. So I think that, there are some experts who think that, well, Iran and its sort of axis of resistance is now very, very weakened. So why should Saudi Arabia be so worried about it, etc.? But I do think there is still grave concern about how Iran, but particularly the IRGC, will react to another Israeli attack or other things as well, or another U.S. one. And I think that Saudi Arabia very much still sees itself in the line of fire if something were to happen. I think the calculation as well is another Israel-Iran war is not a question of if, it's a question of when. So I really do think that Saudi Arabia is committed to maintaining the relationship with Iran, no matter how frosty it is. I think that they have found it helpful. I think Saudi Arabia has also played a very helpful role in terms of conflict de-escalation between the U.S. and Iran at various points over the last couple years. And I think that they will continue to play that role as well, along with others like Qatar and Oman. But again, I really do think that this is the reality of the region, and this is a reality that is not appreciated in Washington at all. But, I also think that, as others have said, this reality also, is unfolding in parallel to the reality of Saudi Arabia seeing Israel as a growing threat, something that I think is also not appreciated in Washington either. So again, I do think that we will continue to see not only a relationship between Saudi Arabia and Iran, but I think we also may see even more regional security dialogue between GCC countries and Iran, even after the Iranian attack on the U.S. base in Qatar over the summer. I know just after that, there were a lot of questions about the GCC-Iran relationship. And yes, it has come under strain. But I think, if anything, it created even greater sort of motivation to keep the channels of dialogue with Iran open to hopefully prevent something like that happening later on. So, thank you.
Well, you just led into a very interesting point. I served a great deal of my career in the states of the lower Gulf. And when I was there were, and we would talk about external threats and who was your friend and who was your not your friend. The fear in the lower Gulf from Bahrain south as the Saudis being a threat to their interests or to their independence as much as the Iranians was always there. I mean, the Iranians, had other problems with them from subversion, but there was a constant Saudi pressure on the Gulfs of the states of the lower Gulf to, we've got to redraw the boundary here. We have to push it there. Time I served in Qatar, the Qataris lost a considerable amount of territory to their south. How do you think the MBS trip has done? Has it strengthened MBS with regard to the United States and his regional power? And if so, is this something that will improve collective security with the lower Gulf states, or work against it? And perhaps, the UAE, for example, has been trying really hard to build a relationship with Iran at the same time. Any thoughts?
Can I hop in just really?
Time. You're doing really well.
So, I think the war in Sudan provides a good entryway to maybe talk about this a little bit. Before the Crown Prince arrived in Washington, there was a lot of reporting on the fact that he would be bringing up the war in Sudan and particularly the UAE's role there and its relationship with the RSF. Obviously, that happened because President Trump announced that the issue was raised. I don't know if that was meant to happen or not, if it was meant to turn into a public announcement, but that is classic Trump, so he announced it. But again, what I would like to underline with that is, I think reading between the lines, actually, that conversation probably highlighted some core differences right now between Saudi Arabia and the UAE, in particular in the Horn and in Khartoum especially. So I think that is a problem. I think it's something that, of course, none of these actors like to really address intra-GCC tensions, and particularly between Saudi Arabia and the UAE right now. But I think it is definitely there. I think that Trump himself, as well as the U.S., has very strong relations with all of the GCC countries. Again, I think that especially the Saudi Arabia, though, for Trump, I think has a very special, unique role. I think in terms of its size and, economically as well, politically. And I think Trump, I think, really genuinely does have a lot of respect for the Crown Prince. I think he made that very, very clear during that press conference. I think he defended him in every way possible. But again, I'd like to emphasize that I think that while it of course wasn't very public and announced that clearly, I do think that some intra-GCC tensions likely were raised during this visit. again, I think especially as related to conflicts in Africa and Sudan in particular. The U.S. administration had been working on this for a while in this sort of quad format. So talks between the U.S., Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Egypt, which have taken place. Of course, I don't think President Trump knew much about those. But right after this visit happened and Trump made this announcement about Sudan, I mean, he has sent his Africa envoy to the UAE. So he is there now. So I do think that President Trump signaled wanting to become more involved in resolving that war, which has become absolutely brutal and has dragged on for a long time, and includes a significant amount of regional competition, including among GCC countries. So again, I do think that Trump was perhaps made more aware of that fact last week. But I think, like with everything, I think Trump's attention span is limited, and he and his team are taking on conflict resolution efforts in a lot of different places. And while he may be able to announce deals, how actually successful they are is something else, and actually implementing them is something else. So, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, really good exposition. Anyone else on the subject of the lower Gulf?
Can I just add 1 or 2 things?
Sure.
Great, thank you. I mean, I agree with Anna's point about Sudan and everything else. I think we have obviously seen signs of economic competition between the Saudis and Emiratis in recent years. Some of the big Saudi moves into the giga projects, into tourism, travel, entertainment, hospitality, moves into which the UAE has had a 25-year head start. Some of the Saudi moves to attract massive amounts of tourism into the kingdom could potentially be aimed at drawing people away from the UAE. We saw the headquarters initiative, obviously, as well, coming into force in 2024. I think the focus on AI over the last 6 months for the Saudis, obviously on this trip as well, has again indicated how you have the UAE really having established a head start in the Gulf, and now the Saudis really trying to also get into the game, and again doing so separately on sort of separate US Saudi and US Emirati tracks. And so again, I think that's just kind of reinforcing some of the separate tracks of bilateral relationships that we've seen. And we've seen it also in the security domain post this summer, where again, after the attack in Doha in September, we saw, again, as you mentioned before, the Saudi-Pakistani agreement being formalized, but then we saw the Qataris in DC with the executive order. Now, of course, the Saudis have added the major non-NATO alliance. So I think we're seeing, again, individual states prioritizing their individual bilateral relationships. And of course, with the nature of the administration being what it is and being so transactional, I think each state is trying to maximize their own interests from a very transactional leadership in DC. So again, I think that works against any form of collective action and just reinforces the sort of separate tracks that we're already very much seem to be on.
Good. Aziz, any thoughts?
I just think just a few thoughts really on the aspect on Sudan, in my opinion. I think one of the few things that probably people would have anticipated will be on the agenda of the trip was going to be Sudan. I didn't think Gaza or there was this talk of some, MBS will go with a regional vision to Trump. I don't think so. I think MBS went with a very bilateral relationship, a bilateral aspect in mind. But I think the issue of Sudan was very prominent. And for me, just a few things that I would say is that I think it's very interesting how there is some media discourse, and the media discussions are kind of projecting that MBS now is becoming a regional leader by being sort of like the Trump whisperer. You know, he's someone that's trying to get Trump into play a bigger role in these dynamics. And I think also the whole inter-GCC situation, especially with Saudi Arabia and the UAE, for me, I think it's becoming, I think it's becoming very salient. But I think there's also an agreement that no matter what, they do not want to have another Gulf crisis, and I don't think it's heading that way. But I can't help but assume, or not assume, I can't help but see and notice that there is a very specific tension increasing, but so far it's managed. It is clearly managed. It's clearly capped. And so I think, in my opinion, it's very interesting to see that dynamic play out inside Sudan. There is one thing that I would like to say also, because I think I've seen it in the chat, and in the chat. So I think it's one of the questions regarding Syria. And in my opinion, I think whether Donald Trump or MBS is, or whether Donald Trump will curtail or be an obstacle for MBS's vision, in my opinion, I don't think so. I think that the whole, one of the MBS's quick wins, his tangibles, low-hanging fruits, I think it was to get sanctions alleviated from Syria. And I think it's increasing. And I think the Saudis are really working hard to give the impression that, Syria is open for business. But I think, as we all know, there's really a situation that really needs a lot of working here. So all in all, I would say what we are seeing is also how, maybe there's a regional expectation now from leaders in the region to say, hey, MBS, if you could go to the United States, how can you please don't forget our projects too? We've seen this also with, for example, the talks yesterday in Lebanon. I think it was the Lebanese president that alluded to MBS's trip to Washington, D.C. Also, Al-Burhan yesterday thanked, for example, this General Burhan of Sudan thanked MBS for going to, thanked MBS for bringing up this issue of Sudan, trying to leverage Trump into the situation in Sudan and trying to get a genuine ceasefire there. So I think for me, there's more of an expectation of this, maybe because also I think something to what Anna was saying, that there is as I think Bernard Haeckel said, there's a bromance, that people see this, that he genuinely admires MBS, and he admires others as well, MBZ and Sheikh Tamim. And I think this, if it's not just going to be Saudi, this is what I anticipate, something that will probably increase Gulf agency, is that their relations with Donald Trump is something that other Gulf, leaders around the region will see and say, hey, can you please bring us something? So we're going to see, it's interesting to keep our eye on that.
You just led into my final question, and we're really pressed for time. So let me sort of ask a grand question and take it around and ask: has Donald Trump moved a tectonic plate? I watched the exchange between Zohran Mamdani and Donald Trump in New York, and when I sort of recovered and went and had a drink to recover, that was a tectonic plate. I'd never expected to see something like that. But Zohran Mamdani just got elected mayor, possibly with the majority of Jewish American votes in New York City actually voting for him as well. If not a majority, a lot of them did. are the tectonic plates moved so much that perhaps Israel's interests no longer trump ours or the interests of the Arab world? Just talking about the future, are we moving into a position where Israel cannot conduct the transactional relationship that I think is going to be the future? I fear or suspect, or I don't even know what my emotion is, but I think Donald Trump will succeed in one thing, is making the United States a much more transactional power uh, in the world than the past. So, on that final note, can we take this from the top? Who went first?
Okay, I'll go first quickly. I think this tectonic shift, if that happens, and maybe it's still to be determined, but if the tectonic shift happens, it's with the US-Israeli relationship rather than the US-Saudi or US-Gulf relationship. However, that said, any shift long-term towards a more transactional approach will, I think, be shifting the terrain much more in favor of the Gulf states, just because that is how I think they would prefer the relationship with whichever president or whatever party is in power. And I think that will be something that will be apparent post-20, as we get closer to the end of the Trump era and beginning to think about what happens next. We're seeing lots of splits within the MAGA movement, including over Israel and whether America first means blank check to Israel. And I think those really bear worth watching out as well. So I think leaders from around the world will be really trying to read the tea leaves in the MAGA movement and also in the Democrats as well, not just ahead of the midterms, but up until 28. And that could be where the shifts are really going to be happening.
Aziz?
No, I agree with that, and I think it's very interesting. I think for me, the notion, one of the things that this trip has dispelled was this idea that I think the benefits of normalization with Israel means that you could really access, a great deal of perks from the United States. And I think what this shown is really the opposite, or that this is not really true, that actually Saudi Arabia and the GCC states actually offer far more than Israel would. And that probably people, as I said, in the MAGA movement, that people perceive Israel as burdensome, and Saudis and the GCC states, you genuinely get a lot more from them. So I think it's shifting. I would say, to answer your question concisely, it's shifting. It's shifting.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the relationship, it's such an interesting question. I do think it does actually represent a tectonic shift in many ways. I think Trump's transactionalism is really going to be increasingly utilized at the highest levels in the U.S. moving ahead. I think the U.S.-Saudi relationship, it has gone through some really difficult times and has managed to move on. So I think in many ways having him, yes, has really strengthened the relationship, absolutely. But I think, as many of you said earlier, I think Saudi Arabia also, though, is very aware that they need to establish strong institutional ties, and that personal ties with Trump or with his inner circle is not enough to maintain the relationship that they want for the longer term. So I think that they will also be very eager to cultivate those institutional bipartisan relationships also. So yeah, thank you.
Well, on that note, we may be at some happy moment for making the relationship with the Arab world in general and with the Gulf on a more rational plane, shall we say. Thank you all. It has been a great pleasure. My apologies again for missing the first 10 minutes. Seeing how the rest of it went, I probably missed a lot of really smart commentary. But thank you all.
Thank you very much. Great to
Well,
join you all.
Thank you.